The snow didn't fall soft that winter. It cut like glass, swirling through the narrow alleys of Dalton's Crossing and settling hard in the bones of anyone left outside too long. On the wooden sidewalk outside McCall's saloon, a woman stood barefoot, coat threadbare, one hand outstretched and trembling. Her name was Hattie Roan, once a war nurse, once a wife, once the kind of woman people tipped their hats to. Now she was the town's shame, a ghost in daylight, someone folks crossed the street to avoid. Children whispered that she'd treated killers. Wives muttered she'd taken coin from sinners. The preacher's wife called her unclean. No one remembered the men she'd saved, just the ones who didn't make it. She hadn't eaten in 2 days. The bread she asked for wasn't even for herself. She'd found a half-frozen dog by the train depot, and it whimpered when she moved away. That's when he rode in. Bo Laramie, black horse, black coat, gold spurs that didn't jingle, but rang with power just the same. He could have passed her by, should have, but he didn't. He looked at her, really looked, and said 6 words that would change both their lives. Come with me just for winter. And just like that the storm shifted, not outside, but in her. The snow had started falling before. Dawn, fat and wet, clinging to the roofs of Dalton's Crossing like mold to old bread. By morning the wind came with it, biting, sharp, relentless, turning the town into a whited-out cage for the poor and the unwanted. Hattie Roan's bare feet burned with cold. She didn't remember when the feeling left them, only that walking had gone from painful to numb. Her boots had been stolen 3 nights ago while she slept behind the smokehouse, and the rag she'd wrapped around her ankles had turned to ice. She'd stopped feeling humiliated after the 2nd day. Now she only felt tired. She stood outside McCall's saloon, just beyond the swinging doors, where the warmth spilled out in flickers of yellow lamplight and laughter. The men inside were flush with coin, stories, and bourbon. She could smell it, not the liquor, but the food, roasted beef, black beans, warm bread. She wasn't begging for pity. Just scraps, please, she said to the barkeep's boy as he darted outside to dump a bucket of ash. Any bread that's going stale, I'll take crumbs. He didn't answer, just turned his eyes downward, muttered something about not being, allowed, and went back inside. Hattie pulled her coat tighter around her. Not that it helped. It had belonged to her husband, Tom, too broad in the shoulders, too thin at the seams. He'd died a year ago, coughing blood and begging her not to spend the last of their coin on medicine he knew wouldn't work. They were in a shack outside. Of Grafton then, snow on the roof, mice in the flour. He died shivering with her hand on his chest. The doctor came 2 days too late. She buried him herself. That should have been enough grief for one lifetime. But when she returned to Dalton's Crossing, the town she'd served before and during the war, she found no welcome. Whispers followed her, accusations, ugly ones. She patched up that Jameson boy after he shot the sheriff's cousin, someone said. Didn't she bed down with that dying outlaw back in 71? She was paid for more than nursing, that's what I heard. No one ever asked her what was true. They just decided. The school wouldn't hire her. The small clinic locked its doors when she came near. She tried to trade sewing for bread, washing for eggs, but the wives turned cold. We don't want her kind around our children, one woman hissed. Now Hattie was running out of winter and hope. A sharp wind cut between the buildings. She bent slightly, wrapping her arms across her chest. A man passed, boots clean and coat new. He didn't look at her. No one did. Not anymore. That's why she noticed him the moment he turned. The corner. He rode slow, not in any hurry. His horse was jet black, coat slick with melted snow, hooves quiet against the wet boards of the street. The man's hat was low over his brow, but the set of his shoulders, the way he sat the saddle, spoke of quiet power. He didn't look like a sheriff or a gambler or a preacher. Too clean to be a drifter. Too cold to be a friend. Bo Laramie. She recognized him when he dismounted in front of McCall's and tied his reins to the post. She'd heard his name. Owned half the grazing land north of town. hired hands, and fired them with a nod. Had money, had pride, had no reason to see her at all. He looked right at her, not away, not through, at her. His eyes weren't full of disgust nor pity, just something solid. Like the way old trees looked before they split, like they'd seen storms and weren't impressed. "You all right, miss?" he asked, voice low. Even. Hattie swallowed. Her throat burned, cracked from cold and shame. "No, sir," she said. Quietly. "I reckon I'm not." He didn't smile, didn't ask questions. Just stepped forward, the snow crunching under his boots, and took off his coat. She held up a hand. "Don't." "Just for a winter," he said. "That's all." "What?" I've got a room on my ranch, empty, a fire that don't go out." "You look like you could use both." She stared. "Why?" He shrugged. "Because nobody else is." Silence hung between them like breath in the cold. She searched his face, looking for mockery, for strings. There weren't any. "I'm not—" she started, but her knees buckled. Bo stepped forward fast and caught her under the arms. She stiffened, humiliated, but he didn't flinch. "Let's get you on that horse," he said. "You can tell me your name once we're warm." They rode out past the edge of Dalton's Crossing, past the fence line where the town stopped pretending it cared about its people. The snow was falling harder now, and the sky had darkened to a pewter shade that made everything look bruised. Hattie sat behind him, wrapped in his heavy coat, her arms weak around his waist. Her hands had gone red from exposure. She didn't speak. Neither did he. The ranch wasn't a grand estate, just a wide house with smoke curling from the chimney, a barn, and two smaller buildings further off. But the windows glowed with life, and the porch light flickered like someone had been waiting. Bo dismounted and helped her down gently, careful not to let her feet touch the snow more than necessary. She clung to his arm without meaning to. Inside, the heat hit her like a wave. Dry pine crackled in the stove. A kettle whistled. The air smelled like coffee and tobacco. She shivered, not from cold now, but from something deeper, the unfamiliar feeling of safety. "You'll sleep here," he said, pointing to a small room off the main hallway. "There's clean linens. Take the bed. I'll stay in the loft." "I didn't come to lie with you," she said quickly, voice trembling. He met her eyes. "I didn't ask you to." Shame flooded her cheeks. "I'm sorry, people assume I'm not." "People." She blinked. He looked away first. "I got stew warming. It's not much, but better than scraps." Hattie nodded. "Thank you, Mr. Laramie." Bo Laramie. "I'm Hattie Roan." He gave the smallest nod. "Get warm, Hattie Roan. We'll talk more once you've eaten." Later that night, curled under a patchwork quilt that smelled of cedar and dust, Hattie stared at the low ceiling and waited to cry. But the tears didn't come. Instead, she thought of his voice. Calm, measured, kind without being soft, she thought. Of the snow outside, and how it was still falling, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't dread morning, she just waited for it. The morning light filtered through the thin curtains like a pale promise. Hattie blinked against it, the warmth of the quilt holding her still. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was. The smell of coffee and wood smoke crept under the door, and with it, memory returned in soft fragments. Snow, a black horse, a man with quiet eyes. She sat up slowly. Her feet ached, but the pain was duller now, wrapped in a kind of numb relief. A basin of water sat near the door, steam long gone, but clean. Next to it, folded linens. A gesture, not a command. She washed her hands first, then her face. Dirt came off in gray streaks. When she caught her reflection in the basin's water, she winced. Her cheeks were hollow, eyes ringed with fatigue and shame. She combed her hair with her fingers and smoothed the coat she still wore. Then, barefoot but upright, she stepped into the hall. The main room of the ranch house was simple but wide. Table, chairs, stove, shelves lined with jars and books. Everything had the scent of utility, not wealth. Beau Laramie sat at the table, writing in a ledger with a cup of coffee beside him. He looked up as she entered, but didn't rise. "Mornin'," he said simply. "Morning," she answered, her voice cracked too soft. "You sleep?" She nodded. "There's porridge on the stove, left the sugar out, but there's some dried. Berries in the tin." She hesitated, and he seemed to sense her uncertainty. "It's not charity," he added. "It's food, and it's cold out." So she nodded again, crossed to the stove, and ladled herself a bowl. Her hand still shook, but less than yesterday. She sat across from him and ate slowly. No one spoke. After several minutes he said, "If you're well enough, I could use help with Thomas. He's one of my hands. Took a bad fall last week. Broke 2 ribs. Fever set in." Hattie looked up. "You don't have a doctor?" "Closest one's 2 towns over. Too slow to get here, too fast to ask questions. I'll look at him." He nodded once, then sipped his coffee. Outside, the wind howled, but inside, the fire didn't go out. The injured man lay in the bunkhouse, cheeks flushed, skin waxy. He was younger than she expected, maybe 25, face still marked by youth, but eyes already dulled by too much pain. The blankets were damp with sweat. "He fell from the hayloft last week," Beau said from the doorway. Didn't say. How bad it hurt until 2 days in. Men are stubborn that way. "So are women," Hattie murmured, kneeling beside the cot. She placed her hand on the man's forehead, then his chest. His breath rattled. 2 ribs at least. Infections set. In. He needs poultice and broth. "Has he been drinking anything?" "Water. Whiskey when he whines enough." She gave him a look. "Not my idea," he said. "Boys think liquor cures fever." "It doesn't," Beau nodded. "Can you fix him?" "No one can promise that," she said. "But I'll try." She worked through the afternoon. Boiled cloths, mixed mustard seed, and vinegar for the chest. Beau brought her what she asked for, without question. At one point he hovered nearby as she crushed herbs. "You always this calm?" he asked. She didn't look up. "Only when it matters." He left her to it. Hours later, as she wiped Thomas' brow with a clean rag, a small voice spoke from the corner. "Is he going to die?" She turned. A boy stood there, thin, no older than 7, big eyes, ragged shirt. He held a wooden horse in his hand. "Not if I can help it," she said gently. The boy nodded solemnly and sat in the corner. "What's your name?" she asked. "Colt." "Like the pistol?" He smiled shyly. "Like the horse." That night, Hattie sat on the porch. The wind had stilled. Snow hung on the trees like lace. Beau joined her, 2 mugs of coffee in hand. "He's better," she said. "You're better," he replied. She looked at him. "I don't know about that." He didn't argue. After a while she asked, "Why did you bring me here?" Beau stared. "Out, over the snow." "Because I remember what it felt like to need someone, and I saw that look in your eye." She didn't ask what look. She already knew. The fire inside the ranch house burned steady into the night, and for the first time in a long time, Hattie Roan dreamed without fear. The next morning, the sun rose over a world carved in frost. Trees glittered with frozen dew, and the ground crunched beneath boots like shattered glass. Hattie stood at the kitchen window, hands wrapped around a warm mug, watching the world come back to life in slow, brittle pieces. She had slept better than she had in weeks, maybe months. The aches were still there, in her back, in her feet, in the place between her ribs that sorrow had made permanent, but they were muted now, draped in warmth, softened by quiet. She heard small footsteps padding across the wooden floor. A pause. Then the scrape of a chair. Colt climbed up without a word, his little legs swinging under the table. He placed the wooden horse in front of him like a talisman. It was handmade, carved rough but lovingly. A scrap of leather for the saddle, a taffo. Faded string for reins. Hattie turned from the window. "Morning, Colt?" He nodded. "Is Thomas still sleeping?" "He is. Fever broke in the night." "That's a good sign." Colt looked relieved but didn't smile. "He snores. Loud." She chuckled softly. "That means he's healing." Beau entered then, shrugging into his coat. He nodded at Colt and then at Hattie. "We'll be checking the fence on the south ridge today. If Thomas is still down, I'll need to take Caleb. Might be back late." Hattie gave a quick nod. "I'll keep tending to him and Colt." Colt perked up. "Can I help you today?" She glanced at Bo. He answered for her. "Only if you do exactly what she says, no fuss." "I won't fuss." Bo paused at the door. "Stay close to the house. Wind's picking up. Might be another storm tomorrow." Then he was gone, a shadow on horseback, disappearing through the pale light. Hattie spent the morning boiling broth, changing bandages, and checking Thomas's breathing. The color had returned to his face, and his eyes fluttered open briefly when she dabbed his forehead. "You're not the preacher's wife," he muttered. "No," she said, gently pressing the cloth again. "But I'm the better nurse." He half smiled before drifting back to sleep. Outside, the wind moaned like a memory. The sky was bruising purple by noon, and Hattie decided they would not venture far. She gave Colt simple chores, gathering dry wood from the pile, helping measure ingredients for bread. He watched her intently, as if memorizing the way her hands moved. "Did you really patch up soldiers?" he asked. "Over the kneading bowl?" "I did. During the war. My pa fought. He died near Shiloh. Mom said he had a brave heart." Hattie looked at the boy. "He did. Most who fought did. Did you have a brave heart, too?" She paused, fingers pressing the dough flat. "I don't know. I think I had a tired one. Still do." Colt leaned his cheek on his hand, watching her. "I think you're kind. And kind is better than brave." The words hit harder than he knew. Hattie had been called a lot of things in the last year. Kind wasn't one of them. "Thank you, Colt. That means more than you think." That evening the wind thickened. Snow began falling in delicate sheets, brushing the windows with quiet insistence. Hattie lit the lanterns early and fed Thomas a few sips of broth. He was stronger. His fever had not returned. She and Colt shared stew and warm bread in the kitchen. He insisted on setting the table, lining the plates with care, placing his wooden horse in the center like a guest of honor. "You know," Hattie said as they ate, "that horse of yours, he needs a name." "He has one." "Oh?" Colt smiled. "Bo, like Mr. Laramie. He doesn't talk much, but he takes care of folks." Hattie laughed. "Fitting." Colt leaned closer. "Mr. Laramie took me in after Mama died. He said he don't know much about raising boys, but he's learning. I think you're better at it." She looked at the boy and felt something shift inside. Her, not pity, not even grief, something quieter, a kind of recognition. "You're a good boy, Colt, and you're safe here." The boy nodded and yawned. "Will you stay the whole winter?" She hesitated. "I don't know yet." He rubbed his eyes. "I hope you do. You and Bo make the house warm." Later, after Colt had gone to bed, Hattie sat alone by the fire. She watched the flames dance and tried not to think of the alleyways where she'd stood begging, of Tom's grave, of the shame that still wrapped itself around her, like a second skin. But the fire was steady. The boy had smiled, and the house, for the first time, didn't feel like someone else's. She leaned back in the chair, pulled the quilt over her legs, and listened to the wind outside. Let it snow, she thought. Let it storm. She had work to do. By the time Sunday came, the snow had eased, but the cold had settled in like a permanent breath on the neck. Hattie stood by the kitchen window, hands on the wash basin, watching the sky shift from pewter to blue. She hadn't set foot in a church since Tom died. The silence that followed his funeral had been louder than any sermon. But Bo, dressed in his worn Sunday coat, stood by the door, waiting. "You don't have to come," he said without pressure. "No," she replied, drying her hands on a linen cloth. "But I think I should." He nodded. Colt emerged from his room, hair combed, shirt tucked, little boots freshly polished. He clutched the wooden horse in one hand. "Mama used to sing in church, real pretty." Hattie smiled gently. Did she now? She used to close her eyes, like she was talking straight to God. Bo adjusted his collar, He listens harder to some folks." The three of them left together, snow crunching beneath their steps as they walked the short mile into town. The church was already gathering souls like a fire draws sparks. Women in shawls, men in dark coats, children with runny noses and stiff shoes. The moment Hattie stepped onto the wooden steps, the air changed, eyes turned. Conversations paused, a whisper, a turn of the head, a tightening of jaws. She had expected it. Still, it hit hard. Her shame came crawling back, dragging old accusations on its belly. Colt noticed. He reached for her hand. Bo said nothing, only offered his arm. She took it. Inside, the pews filled quickly. Hattie sat beside Colt, with Bo at the aisle. The preacher's voice rang out, but she barely heard it. Her eyes fixed on the preacher's wife, Marilla Tull, whose lips were pressed into a bitter line. After the sermon, during coffee and handshakes, it began in earnest. "Didn't know the Laramies were taking in strays now," someone whispered too loudly. "Maybe she thinks the snow forgives sin." A nurse, was she? Or something else? Hattie stood tall. She said nothing. Not here, not yet. But when Colt dropped his biscuit, and Marilla Tull looked down her nose and said, "Perhaps he should learn to behave like a proper boy." Hattie stepped forward. "He behaves better than most men I've met, and I've met them on battlefields." The room stilled. Bo moved behind her. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Marilla blinked, then turned away. Hattie helped Colt pick up the biscuit. They left. The church without a farewell. That afternoon, back at the ranch, Hattie sat by the fire. She wasn't angry, not really, just tired of being judged by people who hadn't held dying boys in their arms, who hadn't scrubbed blood from floorboards with bare hands, who'd never buried someone they loved in frozen soil. Bo brought her tea. "Yoey." "Didn't have to speak," he said. "I did. For Colt, for me." He nodded. "They'll talk. They always do." "Let them." She sipped the tea. The warmth spread slow. Colt sat near the hearth, drawing circles in the ash with a stick. He hummed to himself. At one point he said, "You looked like a hero today." Hattie smiled, eyes glinting. "I felt like someone worth something." That night the wind howled again, but inside the house the fire burned strong. And Hattie, once a shamed widow, now sat tall in a chair that finally felt like hers. The snow melted slow that week, leaving behind a brittle crust of ice and muddy slush that turned the road into a treacherous path. Hattie busied herself with chores, mending shirts, tending to Thomas, watching over Colt. The days passed with a kind of fragile steadiness, like the ranch was holding its breath between storms, but Bo had grown quieter. She noticed it one morning as he returned from the trading post, dust clinging to his coat, and a crease between his eyes that hadn't been there before. He didn't speak much over supper, didn't answer when Colt asked if they'd go hunting rabbits that Sunday. That night, as they washed dishes side by side, Hattie asked, "Something wrong?" Bo dried his hands on a towel. "Saw someone in town, man from the past. Didn't expect to see him again. An enemy?" Something like that. He didn't elaborate, and she didn't press. But the air in the house felt changed after that. 2 days later, the man came riding up the lane. Hattie saw him from the window, a tall figure on a pale horse, black coat dusted with road and age. He dismounted with the ease of someone who knew his way around places he didn't belong. His beard was thick, but not enough to hide the long scar that ran from his left ear down his neck like a claw mark. Bo stepped onto the porch as the man approached. They stood staring at each other for a long moment. No handshake, no greeting. Then, "Didn't expect you to come here, Burke," Bo said. Burke smiled, slow and unkind. "Didn't expect you to be playing house with a pretty nurse and a boy that ain't yours." Hattie felt the heat rise in her chest. She stepped outside, her voice low. "You got business here?" Burke's eyes flicked over her like inventory. "Plenty. But I'll start with words, not bullets." Bo didn't flinch. "You brought trouble with you. Say what you came to say." Burke reached into his coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper. tossed it onto the porch. "This says the land you're living on ain't yours. Says it belongs to a man named Cyrus Greeley, who just happens to owe me a favor." Bo didn't look at the paper. "I paid for this land. I've got papers of my own." "Then let's see who the court believes, huh?" Burke tipped his hat to Hattie. "Ma'am." He turned and mounted up. As he rode away, he called back over his shoulder, "Snow's not the only thing coming." Inside, Hattie picked up the paper. It was official-looking, with a seal, but she could tell it stank of corruption. "You think he forged it?" she asked. Bo nodded. "More likely bought someone to write it. Burke doesn't do paperwork. He does threats." "Why now?" Bo hesitated. "Because I'm building something worth taking, and because I've got something worth breaking." She looked at him carefully. "You mean the ranch?" His eyes didn't leave hers. "I mean this house. You. Colt." That night the wind came howling back, not from the north, but from the west, the direction of town, of courts, of men with grudges and guns. Hattie lay awake long after Colt had fallen asleep. She heard Bo moving outside, checking the locks, tightening the shutters. She rose, pulled on her coat, and found him standing by the fence, staring into the dark. "You going to tell me the rest of it?" she asked. Bo didn't look at her. "Burke and I rode together once, long time ago, before the money, before the land. He killed a man and pinned it on me. I cleared my name, barely. I bought this place with the last coin I had and made sure no one followed. And now he's come knocking, and now he knows I care. About more than just cattle." Hattie stepped closer. "You're not alone." He looked at her then, and there was a softness in his face she hadn't seen before. "I know," he said, "and that might be the only reason I can stand what's coming." The next day Bo rode to the courthouse. He took the real deed, a rifle, and a calm that came from knowing storms didn't last forever. Hattie watched him go, Colt waving from the porch. And even as the clouds gathered again, she believed, for the first time, that she was no longer at the mercy of other people's lies. She was part of something now, something worth fighting for. The snow had stopped falling, but it left behind a sky as gray and heavy as iron. The wind carried a strange quiet, not peace, but the kind of hush that comes before something breaks. Inside the ranch house, things moved like clockwork. Hattie stitched a tear in Bo's coat near the fire. Thomas had recovered enough to walk without help and was chopping wood out back, muttering about Burke under his breath. Colt played in the corner, murmuring to his wooden horse. Bo hadn't returned from the courthouse yet, and the day was stretching too long. As the hour bent into late afternoon, Hattie set the coat aside and stood. "I'm going to check the pantry. Colt, want to help me take stock of what we've got left?" The boy nodded eagerly and followed her into the small pantry tucked behind the kitchen wall. She handed him a slate and a bit of chalk, and he scratched. Symbols for beans and rice with more focus than she expected. It made her smile. Halfway through counting flour sacks, she heard Thomas calling from outside. She stepped out to answer, leaving Colt behind for just a moment. That's when he heard it. The back door creaked. A voice slipped through, low and mean. "You tell Bo he's got 2 days to pack up and get out, or we come back, and next time we don't bring paper." Colt crept closer to the sliver of light beneath the pantry door. The voice chilled him. "He thinks that woman and kid make him strong? They make him weak. Weak men lose things." Boots stomped. The door slammed. Colt didn't breathe for several seconds. Then, shaking, he tucked the slate under his arm and ran for the fire. When Hattie returned, she found Colt sitting stiff, pale. The slate in his lap had one word scribbled across it in jagged chalk. "They're coming." She crouched in front of him. "Who?" "A man. He said they'd be back. Said they'd take things. Hurt Bo. Hurt you." Her heart twisted. She drew him close. "You were brave to listen, brave to tell me." He nodded, jaw trembling. That night, when Bo returned, she told him everything. He listened in silence, Colt clinging to his leg. Bo didn't speak for a long time. Finally, "We're not running." Hattie's voice was low. But we need help. Bo looked at her. Then I reckon it's time to call in some old debts. The next morning, Bo rode out early. He didn't say where, only that he'd be back before dark. Thomas stayed near the house, rifle in hand. Hattie taught Colt how to make hardtack, though her hands shook every time the wind rattled the window panes. By dusk, Bo returned. With him came two men Hattie didn't know, grizzled, quiet, armed. One tipped his hat. "Name's Webb. This here's Doyle. We owed Bo. Figured it was time we paid it." They set up in the barn, took shifts on watch, reinforced the fence and secured the back windows. Hattie found herself boiling water and bandages again, just in case. Old habits, old fears. Colt helped. He didn't ask many questions. "Why do people hurt good folks?" he asked once. She paused. "Because sometimes they're too empty to see goodness. It scares them." Colt nodded, like that made perfect sense. On the second night the sound came again. Hoofbeats, many, not the kind that passed through, the kind that circled. Waited. Bo stood at the window, rifle in hand. Doyle whispered, "They'll come at dawn." "Men like Burke prefer light for killing." Bo looked at Hattie. "Take Colt to the root cellar. I'm staying." "Hattie, I've tended to wounds before. I'll do it again, but I won't leave." They locked eyes. He nodded. Dawn broke like fire behind the hills. The first shot cracked the silence. It hit the post beside the barn. Then another. Then shouting, Hattie pushed Colt into the cellar, handed him the wooden horse. "Stay quiet, no matter what." He nodded. She closed the door. Gunfire roared. Thomas fired from the loft, Webb from behind the trough. Doyle took two men before he fell back, bleeding from the arm. Bo moved like he had before the land. Before the calm. Fast, cold, precise. Hattie dragged. Doyle, behind the barrels, tied a strip of curtain around his wound. "You're no preacher's wife," he grunted. "No," she said. "I'm worse. I know how to stop bleeding." The siege lasted an hour. Then a horn blew. Retreat. Men scattered. Burke was not among the fallen. Bo stood at the gate, smoke rising behind him, blood on his sleeve. "Fire in his eyes. They'll be back," he said. Hattie nodded. "So will we." Colt emerged from the cellar, holding the horse like a banner. "Is it over?" Bo crouched. "For now." Colt looked between them. "Then we won." They didn't argue, because in that moment they had. Snow clung to the windows like frost-bitten lace. The ranch had survived the siege, but it hadn't come through untouched. The fence was half-splintered, the barn door hung crooked. Doyle's shoulder wound, festered slow despite Hattie's poultices, and Thomas had a graze across his brow that throbbed purple and red, but they were alive. Still standing, Colt didn't let his wooden horse leave his side. He carried it from room to room like a badge of honor. Hattie noticed he walked taller now, still quiet, but there was grit in the way he watched Bo stack firewood, or how he stood a little straighter when the wind banged against the shutters. They were safe, for the moment, but every creak in the walls, every shifting shadow, felt like a warning. Hattie sat by the hearth that evening, candlelight flickering against the far wall, writing letters she didn't plan to send, one to Tom, one to a sister she hadn't seen since the war, one to herself. Bo watched her from the doorway. "That for someone I should worry about?" he asked gently. She shook her head. "Just ghosts." "Thought I'd let them talk a while." He stepped in, boots thudding softly against the worn floor. "They say anything useful?" She looked at the pages. One said, "I'm not the same woman who begged in the snow." The other asked if I'd stopped running. "Have you?" She folded the page. "Not sure yet, but I stopped hiding. That counts for something." He nodded, sat beside her. The fire crackled between them. "I wrote letters once," he said. "Back before the land. Wrote to my brother, told him I was going to build something honest, told him I hoped he'd find something that made the war feel worth it. Did he? Died outside Coldwater, never read a word." They sat quiet for a long while. Outside, snow whispered against the glass. Inside, heart softened just enough. Colt entered, yawning. He curled beside Hattie, head on her lap, horse tucked under his arm. "If we write letters," he mumbled, "do we gotta send them?" "No, sweetheart," Hattie said. "Some letters are just for the fire." She fed one of the pages into the flame. It curled and blackened, words vanishing like ash. A kind of peace settled in its place. The next morning a rider came bearing news. Burke had gone to the county seat. Filed charges against Bo. Fraud, trespassing, conspiracy. "He's reaching," Bo muttered. "He's dangerous," Hattie corrected. Bo looked out toward the hills. "Then we need to beat him with something he can't fight." "Truth? Proof." Bo packed a saddlebag with papers, then paused. "You coming with me?" Hattie straightened. "To the county seat?" "To face the ghosts. If I ride alone, they'll make me out to be the liar. But you? They won't see you coming." She considered, then nodded. "We ride at dawn," Bo smiled. "Just like old times. I was never the shootin' type." "Good. They'll never see you until it's too late." That night, she wrote one more letter. Just in case, she didn't sign it, didn't need to. The fire took it all the same. The frost hadn't lifted by the time Bo and Hattie saddled the horses. The sun had barely cracked the horizon, and the ranch was wrapped in a cold hush. Colt stood at the gate, bundled in his thickest coat, his wooden horse in one mittened hand. "Do you have to go?" he asked. Hattie crouched. "We'll be back before the next storm. Promise." He nodded solemnly, then turned and hugged Bo around the waist. Bo froze, surprised, then patted the boy's back. "Look after the fire for us," Colt saluted. "Yes, sir." They rode out without fanfare, two shadows crossing the silver fields. The road to the county seat wound through pine and shale, crossing frozen creeks and narrow passes. Hattie hadn't been this far east since before Tom's death. Every bend in the road held a ghost. Every snow-covered ridge whispered memory. For the first hour, they rode in silence. Then Bo spoke. "You ever think you'd come back to court?" "I thought I'd die with no name left to argue for," he nodded. "You've got one now." She looked at him. "Because of you?" "No," he said. "Because you kept standing." They reached the county seat by midday. It was a bigger town than Dalton's Crossing. Cobbled streets, brick storefronts, a courthouse that loomed like judgment itself. As they dismounted, eyes turned, some curious, some calculating. Inside the courthouse, the warmth was tight and dry. Bo handed over the land papers. Hattie stood beside him, head high. A clerk examined the documents, then frowned. "Mr. Greeley already submitted a claim. Says you forged these." Hattie stepped forward. "Then you'll want to compare the signatures. And ask why Mr. Greeley sold the land twice?" "I was there when Bo bought it. I saw the ink dry." The clerk blinked, surprised by her tone. "You'll have to testify." "Then let me speak," she said. Later that afternoon, in a hearing room lined with stern faces and short patience, Hattie took the stand. She spoke clearly, calmly. Laid out the events, the forged paper Burke delivered, the real deed Bo kept, the witnesses who signed it. When the judge asked if she had any interest in the property, she answered, "Only in seeing justice done. Because too many folks think women like me can't tell the truth and be believed." That silenced the room. Bo's turn came. He told his piece with fewer words, but none wasted. When he stepped down, Hattie squeezed his hand beneath the table. The judge cleared his throat. "We'll reconvene tomorrow for final decision." Outside, they walked through falling snow, exhausted but upright. "Think we did enough?" Bo asked. "We told the truth. Now it's their turn." They stayed that night in a boarding house run by a widow with sharp eyes and too many cats. Hattie sat by the fire, watching Bo sleep in the chair beside her, boots still on, rifle close. She didn't write a letter that night. She just watched the flames. And for once, they didn't look like warning. They looked like home. Snow battered the windows of the boarding house in the early morning hours. The storm had arrived quicker than expected, rolling in over the hills like a low curse. From their shared breakfast plate of cold bread and eggs, Bo and Hattie watched. The sky turned from gray to near black. "We might be stuck here longer than we planned," he muttered. Hattie nodded. She wasn't thinking of the road. She was thinking of Colt. The boy had never been left so long. Would Thomas know to calm his nightmares? Would he keep the fire steady if the storm knocked the chimney into silence? But the judge was set to deliver the ruling that day. So they dressed, wrapped scarves high against the wind, and walked the 3 blocks to the courthouse. Inside, the hearing room was fuller than before. Word had spread about the fight, about Burke's threats, about the woman who testified like she'd seen war and loss, and still stood up straighter than any man in the room. Judge Halbert entered with his coat, still dusted in frost. He sat, cleared his throat, and wasted no time. After reviewing both claims and signatures, hearing testimony, and checking with the notary listed on Mr. Laramie's original deed, I find the land was legally purchased and held. Mr. Greeley's second, sale was fraudulent. Mr. Burke's claims, null. Murmurs, a gasp. Hattie exhaled. The judge banged the gavel. Case closed. Mr. Laramie, you may continue to hold and improve the land without contest. Outside, the snow had thickened to a white wall. Bo turned to Hattie. We won. She let the words settle like snowflakes. Let's go home. But the road home was gone. The path over Pine Hollow was buried. Trees bent low with ice, and the wind screamed so loud the horses refused to cross. The stableman shook his head. You try that trail today, you'll find yourselves dead before dark. They returned to the boarding house. Colt would be waiting. The fire would be running low. Thomas would be watching the window. Bo paced the front room. Hattie stood at the window, watching snow lash the street like a whip. He'll be all right, Bo said. Thomas is strong. He's 7, Hattie whispered, and he's already lost too much. The night stretched long. In the silence, Hattie wrote again. Not to Tom this time, to Colt. She told him to be brave, to keep feeding the fire, to listen to Thomas, to hug the horse and remember they were coming home. She folded the letter and tucked it into her satchel. She would hand it to him herself. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, Colt had sat by the window alls. Day, Thomas made stew. Doyle, still healing, played cards with him. But Colt barely smiled. When the wind howled, he said, "That's what ghosts sound like." Thomas looked up from the fire. Your ma used to say the same. Hattie's not my ma. Maybe not by blood, but she's fought for you, boy. That's something. Kin can't always claim. Colt thought about that. He curled up with the wooden horse, whispering its name. Bo. On the 3rd day the storm broke. The sun came back as a weak gold smear across the sky. Bo and Hattie rode out before the frost melted. The road was hard, narrow, brittle, but they didn't stop. Colt was on the porch when they returned. His face lit up like a lantern. He didn't run, just stood tall, waiting. Bo dismounted first. Fire still going? Colt nodded. Didn't let it die once. Hattie stepped down. She handed Colt the letter. For you. I wrote it when I thought we'd be longer. He opened it right there, read every word, then hugged her so hard she had to kneel. You came back, he said. We always will. Bo stood watching. The wind tugged at his coat, but he didn't move, just smiled. The house behind them was whole. The fire was warm. The snow would come again. But they were ready, together. The snow had barely melted from the fence posts when the rider appeared. Just a figure in the distance at first, still as a scarecrow, coat snapping in the wind. Hattie spotted him through the kitchen window as she kneaded dough, her hands working rhythmically while her eyes narrowed. Bo, she called, not loud, but enough. He came in from the barn, wiping oil from his hands. One glance toward the hill, and his jaw tightened. He been there long? Not moving, not yet. Bo reached for the rifle near the door. Keep Colt inside. But Colt had already crept to the window. Is that Burke again? Hattie shook her head. Don't think so. Looks like someone else. Doesn't move like a threat. Not yet, Bo muttered. They let the stranger approach slowly. He didn't ride fast, didn't shout. When he got close enough to the gate, he stopped, raised one hand. "My name's Ezra Wynne," he called. "I ain't here to cause trouble. Just looking for a roof and maybe some work." Bo said nothing. Ezra dismounted, slow and steady. He was older, maybe 50, with a weathered coat and sharp eyes. No visible weapons, no twitch in his stance. Hattie stepped out onto the porch. "Where are you from, Ezra?" He took off his hat. "West of Delton, rode all the way through Pine Hollow. Heard there was a ranch that stood up to Burke and kept standing. Figured that kind of place might be worth asking at." Bo exchanged a look with her, then nodded. "We don't feed lazy hands." "I ain't lazy, just hungry." That night Ezra slept in the barn loft, and Hattie made enough stew for 5. He ate slow, like a man not used to warm food or warm rooms. Colt watched him with quiet suspicion, his wooden horse in his lap. After supper, Hattie asked, "You ride through Dalton's Crossing?" Ezra nodded. "Town's got a mouth on it. Folks there still whisperin' your name like it burns their tongues." Bo didn't react, but Hattie smiled. "Good, let 'em." The days that followed felt stretched thin. The land was firming up again, and with the thaw came hard work. Fence mending, tool oiling, horse brushing. Ezra proved himself handy, quiet, respectful. But still there was a distance to him, like he was carrying a story he hadn't told yet. On the third evening, Colt asked outright, "You run from something, Mr. Wynne?" Ezra paused, then nodded. "Lost something. Still looking to make it mean something." Colt considered that. "You can help me with my chores tomorrow. That way you're doing something good." Ezra smiled. "Deal." That night, after Colt went to bed, Hattie sat by the fire sewing a torn hem. Bo sat beside her, sipping coffee. "You trust him?" he asked. "Not yet," she replied, "but I don't fear him, and I think he needs what we needed." Which was? A second chance that doesn't come with questions. Bo looked at her for a long time, then set his coffee down and kissed the top of her head. They didn't say another word, but the silence between them was warm. It was a Tuesday morning when Colt found the letter. The sun was just beginning to warm the frost off the porch planks, and Ezra had taken him out to the barn to teach him how to oil saddle straps. Colt had been poking around in the tool chest, looking for a leather punch when he noticed a folded square of paper wedged behind the back panel. At first he thought it might be instructions or an old bill of sale, but the way it was folded, with corners worn soft and creased like it had been held 100 times, told him different. He pulled it out and squinted at the writing. It was smudged but legible. He didn't mean to read it, but once he saw his name on the second line, curiosity won. "In case we don't make it back, I want you to know you are brave, that your kindness has held us all together more than you'll ever understand." Colt's hands trembled. He recognized the handwriting, Hattie's. He didn't understand all the words, but he understood enough. It was a goodbye. He didn't tell anyone at first, just tucked the letter in his pocket and went back to cleaning leather straps. Ezra didn't notice the change in his silence. Or maybe he did and chose not to mention it. Later, Colt slipped back into the house and hid the letter beneath his pillow. He felt different. Not sad, but older. Like he'd been trusted with a secret too big for his hands. That night, Hattie found him curled up on the floor by the hearth instead of in his bed. Wooden horse clutched tight, eyes too wide. "You all right?" she asked. He nodded. But he didn't speak. She sat beside him. "You're allowed to ask things, or say what's on your chest, even if it's heavy." He was quiet for a long time. Then, "Did you think you weren't coming back?" She blinked. "What?" He looked at the fire. "From the storm, from the court. Did you think you were going to die?" Hattie froze. Then her voice dropped. "Where'd you hear that?" "I didn't. I read it." He reached into his coat, pulled out the letter, held it out. She took it slowly. "I didn't mean to, but I saw my name and I didn't know you thought like that." She folded the letter without reading it. "I wasn't planning to die." But I've seen enough to know that sometimes the world doesn't care what you plan. I wanted to leave something behind, in case. Colt was quiet again. Then he asked, "Do you still feel that way?" She took a breath. "No, not anymore." "Why not?" She smiled. "Because we made it back, and because I believe in tomorrow again." He leaned into her, and she wrapped her arms around him. "Promise me," he whispered. "I promise," she said. "No more letters like that. Not unless I'm around to read them with you." Bo came in from the porch a while later, snow still, melting on his coat. He saw them on the rug. Quiet, steady. He didn't ask questions, just sat beside them and threw another log on the fire. The wind howled outside, but inside they were whole. It began with hoofbeats, slow, deliberate, the sound of authority rather than threat. Ezra was the first to hear it, pausing mid-swing while chopping kindling out back. He turned toward the road and narrowed his eyes. 3 riders. Middle one wore a shiny tin badge on his chest, a freshly oiled rifle slung over his saddle, flanked by 2 deputies from Coldwater, and in the center of them, with that same slanted grin and long scar down his neck, rode Burke. Only now he wore the badge. Ezra dropped the axe, strode to the porch, and called into the house. "Bo, trouble on the trail, and it's wearing a tin star." Bo appeared at the door, coat already on. He met Ezra at the steps, rifle in one hand. "You sure?" "Positive. He ain't hiding anymore." Hattie stepped out next, Colt behind her. "Stay." "In," Bo said to them. But Hattie stood her ground. The riders stopped at the gate. Burke tipped his hat with mock civility. "Mighty fine day for a visit, isn't it?" Bo didn't smile. "Deputies got lost." The deputy on the left, a younger man with a nervous twitch, spoke first. "We're here on official county business. Mr. Burke's been appointed interim sheriff of Coldwater." Ezra muttered, "Like letting a fox run the hen house." Burke dismounted. "There's been accusations, Laramie, about harboring fugitives, falsifying land deeds, tampering with court officials." Bo let the silence stretch. "You're here to arrest me?" he asked. "Not yet. Just here to have a look around. Ask a few questions, see what turns up." Hattie stepped forward. "Without a warrant, you're not stepping over that gate." Burke turned, surprised. "And who are you to stop the law, miss?" She didn't blink. "I'm the one who knows the law better than you ever will. And the judge who threw out your fake deed? He's still sitting behind that bench." The deputy looked uneasy. Burke smiled, but it didn't touch his eyes. "Just being neighborly." Bo cocked his head. "You've never been neighborly a day in your life." They didn't cross the fence line. Not that day. But the message was clear. Burke was back, and he'd found a legal disguise. That night, the ranch gathered around the table. Hattie, Bo, Ezra, Thomas, Colt. Even Doyle pulled himself upright. "What do we do?" Ezra asked. Bo looked at each of them. "We prepare. We don't break laws and we don't bend knees. We stand. That's all we can do," Hattie said. "Then we do it together." The next week brought tension that could be cut with a butter knife. Riders spotted in the hills, Coldwater men trailing near the stream. Ezra took to sleeping in the barn, Loft with a rifle at hand. Doyle cleaned the old revolvers. Hattie taught Colt how to load a chamber, just in case. Colt didn't flinch. He asked smart questions, practiced without fear. When Hattie asked if he was scared, he said, "Only of not being ready." She hugged him tighter than he expected. Then the fire came. They smelled it before they saw it. Acrid smoke rolling up from the north field. The old hay barn, the one with supplies stored for spring. Bo and Thomas rode out first, but the flames were already too high. It lit the night sky orange. Nothing to do but watch it burn. On the edge of the field, horse prints. 3 sets. No witnesses, no arrests. Just a sheriff who smiled too wide. 2 days later, Burke returned, this time alone, this time on foot. He stood at the fence line, arms folded. Bo didn't go out to meet him. Hattie did. "I want you to listen," Burke said. "To what? More lies? To reason." She waited. "You've got a good thing here. Don't let pride get it burned to the ground. You walk away, I'll make sure the boy and the old man get safe passage. Bo can go back to cattle. You keep your name. And what do you get? Land, reputation, all the things I was owed. She shook her head. You weren't owed anything. You just hate that Bo made something without you. His jaw clenched. You think you know men like me? I do. I nursed them as they died. I watched. Them bleed over dreams they didn't earn. Burke's voice dropped. You think this ends with you standing tall? It ends with fire, with loss, with the law calling you outlaw. She didn't flinch. Then we'll build something out of the ashes. Again and again. She turned her back to him, and he didn't cross the gate. That night, Bo found her at the porch. You were brave today. I was angry. Same thing sometimes. They watched the stars. The wind was cold, but inside the house was warm, and that would have to be enough. The storm came fast and without warning. Late February, just when the thaw had teased its first green shoots from the earth, the sky turned violent again. Wind roared over the hills like it had a score to settle. By dusk, snow had buried the fence, posts, and the barn doors groaned against their hinges. Inside the house, the lamps flickered. Hattie tightened every shutter herself, double-checked the pantry, and moved Colt's cot closer to the fire. This one feels different, she said. Bo nodded, loading shells into a canvas belt. Everything's felt different since Burke came. Back. Ezra stood at the window. Storms cover. If they're coming, they'll come now. They did. It started with a whistle, low, long, shrill enough to slice through wind. Ezra tensed. That ain't the wind! 3 shapes broke from the tree. Line, then 6, then more, dark figures. Long coats, rifles. Burke had brought men, not deputies. Hired hands, guns for gold. Bo took the front. Ezra the barn. Thomas circled wide, keeping to shadows. Hattie moved Colt behind the root cellar trapdoor, whispered instructions through. His hair. You don't open this unless it's my voice. Not even Bo's. Not even God's. He nodded. She closed the door, bolted it, and went to war. Gunfire shattered the storm. Muzzles lit the snow like lightning. The front window burst in a hail of glass. Ezra dropped one man near the gate. Bo took another from behind the stable wall, but they kept coming. Too many. Hattie moved between the front door and wounded Doyle, keeping pressure on his leg with one hand and aiming Bo's spare rifle with the other. Then she saw Burke. He wasn't in the fray. He was circling toward the house, toward Colt. She moved fast, cut through the back door, slipped into the white chaos. Burke had a blade in one hand, rifle slung. Smiling, she fired. Missed. He charged. They hit the snow together. He was stronger. She was faster. But fury can make up for size. He pinned her. Raised. The knife. A shot rang out. He fell sideways. Colt stood behind him, rifle shaking, eyes wide. You said not even God, he whispered. I meant it, but I'm glad he sent you anyway. She pulled him into her arms. Behind them, the gunfire slowed, then stopped. 3 men remained alive on Burke's side. Ezra disarmed them. Bo watched from the porch, blood trailing down one arm. Thomas limped into view, hat gone, eyes hard. Burke didn't move, didn't breathe. They buried him by the north ridge. No words, no markers. Just snow and silence. That night the house was quiet. Colt curled against Hattie, who didn't sleep. Not for a long while. When Bo sat beside her, she whispered, He was just a boy. He saved your life? Still a boy. Bo didn't argue. Just took her hand. The wind had died, but the weight of the night hadn't lifted. Spring came late to the valley. Snow melted in reluctant puddles pulling back like a scab from old wounds. The fence posts emerged first, then the creek, then the high meadow where Hattie had planted root vegetables no one believed would survive the frost. But they had. Tiny green shoots broke the soil, defiantly alive. At the ranch, repairs began before the thaw was complete. Ezra built new shutters. Thomas mended the barn door with one good hand. Bo oversaw it all, though he walked slower now, favoring his left leg from the wound that never quite closed clean. Colt helped wherever he could. But there was something changed in him. He didn't play with the wooden horse much anymore. He cleaned his boots every morning, made his bed without being asked, and watched the tree line more than a boy should. Hattie tried not to cry the first time he asked if the dead stayed buried. "Sometimes," she said. "Sometimes they follow you around, but if you look them in the face, they back down." He nodded solemnly and got back to work. In mid-March, a courier came. The county was holding a hearing about Burke, about the night he died, about who was to blame. "Show up, or they'll decide without you," the note said. Bo stared at the paper for a long time. "They'll want to paint him as law and us as rebellion." "Then we'll speak," Hattie said. "Clearly, together." They rode to the county seat again. Ezra, Bo, Hattie. Colt stayed behind this time, watched by Doyle and Thomas. The town looked different in spring, less like a threat, more like a test. The streets were muddy, but the windows open. The courthouse steps were swept clean. Inside, Judge Halberd looked tired. "Testimony will be heard." Then judgment passed, he said. Burke's remaining deputies were there, dressed in borrowed honor, spinning stories from broken truths. Hattie waited until last to speak. She stood straight, voice steady. Burke used the law like a weapon. He wore a badge, but he never earned it. He brought violence to our land, to our child, to our home. And he died because he tried to take something that wasn't his. Again. She looked every man in the eye. You can call it what you want. But where I come from, that's not murder. That's self-defense and justice. The verdict came that evening. No charges, no trials, no more questions. Case closed. Justice by the skin of its teeth. They returned to the ranch to find Colt in the May garden, tending the first shoots with a child's reverence. "They came up," he said, "even after the cold." "So did we," Bo answered. That night, Hattie stood on the porch, wind lifting her hair. Bo came to stand beside her. "You ever think it would end this way?" she asked. "I never let myself think that far." "Do you now?" He looked toward the fields where green dared to grow. "I think we've got more story ahead of us." She slipped her hand into his. And for the first time since winter began, it didn't feel like surviving. It felt like living. Spring deepened. The thaw softened the roads and swelled the river until it ran like a silver vein through the land. Wildflowers bloomed in the high pasture, dotting the hills like God's apology. Life didn't return all at once, but it crept. Back, cautious and tender, the ranch grew quieter in a different way. Not the quiet of threat or grief, but a deeper hush, like the house itself was exhaling. One morning, Hattie stood at the kitchen counter, rolling out biscuit dough while Colt sat at the table reading an old almanac. The flour tin was nearly empty. She reached in deep, scraping the bottom. Her fingers struck something cold. She frowned, set the spoon down, and pulled it free. A ring. Simple. Gold. The kind that waited years at the bottom of a drawer or between worn pages of a Bible. Bo entered then, wiping grease from his hands. Hattie held it up. "You lose something?" He didn't answer right away. Then he smiled, that soft, rare smile that belonged only to her. "I didn't lose it," he said. "I put it there." She waited until Colt went outside to press further. "How long's it been there?" "Since the week after the hearing. You hiding proposals now?" "I was waiting for the snow to melt, and for the look in your eyes to say you were staying." She looked down at the ring. "I never needed a ring." "I know, but I think the boy needs to see it. Needs to know we're not just surviving each other. We're choosing." She set the ring on the windowsill. "Then you better ask him first." That evening, Colt was in the stable brushing down the old mare when Bo crouched beside him. "Do you think this place is your home now?" Colt nodded. "Has been for a while." "Think you'd be all right if Hattie stayed? For good?" "She already does," Bo smiled. "But if we made it real?" Not just firewood and chores, but family, Colt thought. Then, you're asking if you can marry her? I am? Colt looked Bo dead in the eye. Only if she gets a new apron. Hers is full of flower holes, Bo chuckled. Deal. The next morning, Bo made coffee and waited by the fire until Hattie emerged. She still had the ring on the windowsill. She picked it up, turned it in the light. Colt says yes, Bo said. So do I. He slipped it on her finger. It fit like it had always been there. The wedding was not a ceremony. There was no preacher, no choir, no polished shoes, just a midday meal, good bread, coffee, and a field warmed by sun. Thomas said a few words, mostly about stubbornness. Ezra played a song on a fiddle he hadn't touched in years. Colt wore a clean shirt and handed them each a wildflower. Doyle raised his mug and said, "To those who dig in and stay." They kissed under an open sky, the breeze tugging at Hattie's shawl, the dust swirling in golden curls. That night, when the others had gone to bed and the fire had dimmed, Hattie sat beside Bo on the porch. "I'm still not used to quiet that. Doesn't carry danger. Give it time. I've never had anything like this. Neither have I." He took her hand. She leaned into his shoulder. "Do you regret anything?" she asked. "Only not doing this sooner." She didn't cry, but her voice shook. When she said, "Me too," the moon climbed high. Somewhere in the hills, an owl called, and the ring on her finger caught the firelight just enough to glow. Chapter 16. A name carved in the gatepost. The summer came with thunder. Lightning cracked above Dry Creek Valley, like. The sky was splitting open, and for a whole week the rain didn't let up. It pounded the tin roof of the ranch house, turned the road to mud, and filled the river so high that the banks looked ready to burst. But for once, no one at the ranch feared the storm. They had built something solid. Bo's limp had worsened since spring, but he worked through it, mending fences, checking stock, teaching Colt to ride better than most grown men. Ezra stayed longer than planned, fixing what needed fixing. Doyle had taken to baking bread, something no one expected, but all came to appreciate. Thomas whittled spoons and argued with barn swallows. And Hattie? Hattie planted more than root. Vegetables? She kept a journal now, taught Colt his letters, taught herself to breathe deeply. To smile at her reflection, she caught herself humming. One warm afternoon in July, she found Colt at the edge of the yard, dragging a pocket knife across the wood post at the front gate. "What are you doing, love?" He looked up, cheeks red. "I didn't ask first. I just wanted to. I can stop." She walked over. On the gatepost, just under the old cattle brand, were letters, deep, messy, but legible. "Laramie," she blinked. Her throat tightened. "Why there?" "'Cause it's ours," he said. "Figured it ought to say so." She knelt beside him. "You spelled it right." "Did I?" "Perfectly." Later that evening, after dinner and dishes, Bo ran his hand across the name carved into the wood. "Looks like it's official." Hattie stood beside him, Colt on the porch behind them. "A name means something," Bo said. "Means you've taken root. Means you've let yourself stay." She nodded. "Means you'll be remembered." He touched the carving, then touched her shoulder. "We ever talk about what comes next?" She looked out at the pasture. "No, but maybe it's time." They started small, adding a second room to the house, expanding the garden, clearing the path to the west field. Bo registered the land again, this time adding Hattie's name beside his. The county clerk asked no questions, just smiled and said, "Glad to see the world right itself, for once." In August, the preacher from Dalton's Crossing rode up, not to sermonize, just to offer an apology. "I judged you harsh," he told Hattie, hat in hand. "My wife, she doesn't agree with me coming, but some wrongs sit heavy." Hattie poured him coffee. "Takes guts to face someone you've harmed." He nodded. "You turned this place into more than a home. You turned it into a promise." When he left, Colt asked if they had to forgive everybody. "No," she said. "Just the ones who mean it." The last week of summer, Bo had a coughing spell that rattled the rafters. Hattie sat him down. You're going to the doctor in cold water. Ain't that bad? It's not a request. He went. Came back with medicine, a new shirt, and a carved cane he didn't want to talk about, but he used it. And when Colt asked if it made him look like an old man, Bo said, "Makes me look like a man who intends to stay upright." One evening, after supper, they all sat on the porch. Ezra strummed his fiddle. Thomas smoked his pipe. Doyle whittled. Colt sketched in a notebook. Bo turned to Hattie. "Do you miss it? The traveling. The nursing tents. The places before this," she thought. Then shook her head. "Those places made me, but they didn't keep. Me? This keeps me," he nodded. "Me too." She leaned into him, and for the first time in either of their lives, there was no war left to fight, no lie left to silence, no fire to put out, just the sound of music, the smell of dust, and a name carved in a gatepost